It's been 3.5 decades since the hippie counterculture collapsed. But though they were reviled by many in their day, hippies are now being called liberators, industry makers, and inspiration behind the most powerful technologies of the 21st century, like Apple Computer. Decadent, drug-addled dropouts, or a flash of hope for a nation on the eve of destruction? Journey back to one of the most electrifying eras in American history, as seen through the eyes of those who lived it. Experience the music, the moments, the message, and discover how a tribe of edge-dwelling idealists shook the most powerful nation on earth to its roots and changed your world far more than you think. In January 1966, the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco was an edgy blend of radicals, dropouts, artists, and die-hard beatniks. Within 6 months, it would become the epicenter of an explosion of social and cultural experimentation, unlike any the United States had ever witnessed.
It was a kind of an orgy of experiment. And by that, I mean not just the drugs and not just the sex, but lifestyle experiments, experiments in art, experiments in political expression, how you express your disapproval of the policies that were being enacted by your government, whether it was the Vietnam War or other things, took on a new form.
From out of the Haight, the hippie movement spread nationwide, taking the baby boom generation by storm, while the fuel for this convention-shattering free-for-all was a complex mixture of politics, economics, and intergenerational conflict. What set it on fire was an enigmatic new drug, lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD.
One pill makes you larger.
Extremely powerful, mind-altering drug. The most powerful probably we know of it. Infinitesimal quantities needed to produce a huge change in the human mind.
Go ask Alice when she's 10 feet tall.
LSD was initially created by Dr. Albert Hofmann, a conservative, respected, if not brilliant chemist who was working at Sandoz Pharmaceuticals in Basel, Switzerland.
The compounds Dr. Hofmann was experimenting with were derived from ergot, a fungus that lives on diseased kernels of rye. In the Middle Ages, it went by the name of St. Anthony's fire and was known to cause people to go berserk. Dr. Hofmann was more focused on the fungus's ability to stimulate circulation.
He accidentally absorbed a tiny amount through his fingertips in April of 1943 and had the first known LSD trip.
Once was not enough. 3 days later, Hofmann intentionally swallowed 250 micrograms of his new discovery. His bicycle ride home through the streets of Basel turned into a surrealistic roller coaster, where buildings breathed and faces morphed into grotesque colored masks. He shared his bizarre experiences with colleagues at the lab, and research into the drug's potential was begun. In one experiment, LSD was injected into a monkey who caused an uproar with his quirky behavior. It was a harbinger of things to come. But the drug had properties that made it attractive to psychotherapists. There were those who believed that when LSD was taken in a carefully controlled environment, it allowed repressed thoughts and emotions to pass uncensored into consciousness, where they could be analyzed.
By the early 1960s, there was over 1,000 scientific papers, peer-reviewed scientific research, that had been written about LSD that were, in many cases, singing the praises in terms of its potential as a healing agent.
Celebrities jumped on the LSD bandwagon. Screen idol Cary Grant publicly admitted to having taken LSD more than 60 times in the course of his treatment for alcoholism and depression. But not all those evaluating the drug were interested in its ability to heal.
It's kind of ironic, but the same drug that was embraced by hippies in the 1960s as a religious sacrament, LSD, of course, we're talking about, had been embraced 10 years earlier, maybe even 15 years earlier, by the Central Intelligence Agency, by America's spy agency, not as a sacrament, but as a weapon.
Inspired by records of Nazi brainwashing experiments from the Dachau concentration camp, the CIA initiated an intensive exploration of LSD's potential as a truth serum and mind control agent. The program was codenamed MK Ultra.
One of the things that the CIA was interested in terms of their research with drugs and other behavior modification techniques was this idea of a Manchurian candidate. One of the things that the CIA actually wanted to do was to create programmed assassins, to reprogram a person to get them to go out and kill somebody, sort of under automatic pilot conditions, if you will. Whether they actually did this sort of thing, we don't know. The documents are cut off at a certain point, but it's very clear that they were looking at this in a serious way. This is not just a movie script idea. This is something that the CIA seriously entertained.
By the dawn of the 60s, the therapeutic community, the CIA, and the U.S. military were all sponsoring LSD research programs at universities and hospitals across the country.
I did LSD legally at UCLA that first time, and it was with somebody next to me who I knew, who I felt was taking care of me. I didn't have to worry about anything, and it was really quite interesting.
But anxieties about the drug were mounting. Researchers had long fretted about the consequences of a hallucinogen as powerful as LSD slipping out of clinically controlled settings and into the wrong hands. Now, the Harvard Crimson was reporting that psychology professor Timothy Leary was conducting touchy-feely group experiments with the drug, and that LSD-laced sugar cubes were circulating freely on campus.
We're not concerned with the drugs, although we're labeled in the public's mind perhaps as drug professors or people who are pushing LSD. We're not concerned with the drugs. We're mainly concerned with man's head. How can we use our own head? That's our personal search.
Leary himself had trouble keeping his hands off the merchandise, chemical or otherwise. He was once quoted as saying that, in a carefully prepared, loving LSD session, a woman will inevitably have several hundred orgasms. Leary's high-profile antics earned him the title of the Pope of Dope. But it was best-selling author Ken Kesey who really let the monkey out of the cage.
He was initially exposed to LSD as part of a government experiment through the Veterans Administration, which ultimately means the U.S. Army.
They were testing LSD and related drugs on soldiers and on civilians, and Ken Kesey was part of a civilian experiment. Kesey was hooked. He took a job as a night attendant at the Veterans Hospital, giving him access to the cabinet where the LSD was stored. His drugged-out interactions with psychiatric patients on the ward served as the inspiration for his critically acclaimed novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. With profits from the book, Kesey transformed himself into the Johnny Appleseed of acid, determined to sow the psychedelic experience in as many receptive minds as possible.
He felt this was something that was almost like a person's birthright. A human being had a right to have this kind of experience. Human societies had been doing it since way back in primitive times in a ritual context.
But there was a hitch. While LSD was still legal in 1965, it was difficult to obtain, and to turn people on in the numbers Kesey had in mind required enormous quantities. Enter Owsley Stanley, a former Army radar specialist turned alchemical wizard who had recently converted his underground amphetamine lab over to LSD production. Aided by a band of iconoclastic misfits called the Merry Pranksters, Kesey and Owsley staged massive acid-fueled parties up and down the West Coast, advertising heavily and charging admission.
We came up with a name for it, the acid test. We called these get-togethers.
It was a zone where you could come in the door and pay your 50 cents or your dollar or whatever, and there was a safe place to freak freely, as we called it in those days, and just twirl and dance. We had a strobe light set up and all sorts of liquid light show, very, very early crude versions of light shows.
Providing the appropriately mind-expanding music was a scruffy young band called the Warlocks, soon to be renamed the Grateful Dead. In a matter of months, Kesey and company had introduced more people to LSD than all the researchers, the CIA, and Timothy Leary combined. But it wasn't until January 21st, 1966, that the hippie movement was launched in the Haight-Ashbury. On that day, the acid test arrived in San Francisco as part of a multimedia extravaganza called the Trips Festival. With 10,000 paying customers, the Trips Festival was a smash. There was even buzz about booking the acid test at Madison Square Garden in New York City. But its greatest impact was on the Haight-Ashbury community itself. For the city by the Golden Gate, the high times had just begun. In March 1966, Time magazine reported on the growing number of oddball communities of LSD users cropping up in major cities.
There was interesting communities evolving in Los Angeles, New York. You also had in London, Amsterdam, and Europe. You had kind of psychedelic subcultures taking root. Nowhere did this whole psychedelic scene emerge with such vivid intensity to the point where it became an international phenomenon like it was in Haight-Ashbury.
If you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair.
You know, we all lived on Haight Street. Haight Street was the theater. You'd dress up, you'd go out every day, and the way you looked was part of your statement. And people were acting out their fantasies in real life. On weekends, residents swarmed to auditoriums like the Avalon Ballroom and the Fillmore to dance ecstatically to local bands, the Grateful Dead, the Jefferson Airplane, and Big Brother and the Holding Company, featuring a young blues singer named Janis Joplin. Every bit as stoned as their audiences, the bands tossed free hits of LSD into the crowd and added hypnotic, free-form improvisations to their sets that could go on for an hour or more. The new sound was dubbed acid rock.
You could travel the universe through that and go through a scary trip, and then they would bring you back down at the end of the concert with some good old songs, and so you'd end on a positive note all the time.
Drugs, especially marijuana and LSD, were ubiquitous and lucrative. The Haight-Ashbury quickly became the world's first psychedelic supermarket, the hub of the dope trade for all of Northern California.
Haight-Ashbury was like heaven and hell, in my opinion. In a 2-mile square area, I think you could arrest everyone on the street for using drugs. And people were going around and handing out drugs to each other. Some of it was just plain sugar, some of it was heavy-duty LSD.
Figured at the cost of 4 cents per microgram, LSD was 4,000 times more valuable than gold. Owsley Stanley, the dominant force in the manufacture and distribution of the drug, became successful enough to be dubbed the acid millionaire by the LA Times. But to the evolving counterculture in the Haight, drugs were more than a good time. For a lot of us, drugs were like ways of breaking through to the other side, pushing ourselves harder and farther than we thought possible to try to come up with a culture that was more humane and more livable. Drugs also loosened the knots of repression and constraint, unleashing a tidal wave of taboo-shattering sexual experimentation.
First of all, the outgrowth of a unique historical moment, the widespread use of the pill that allows people to have recreational sex, number one. But secondly, it's also part of this ethic of self-fulfillment, this belief that life was about being happy. It wasn't about conforming to what you believed other people wanted you to do.
Girls should be virgins until they're married and save yourself for your husband. Right. And I don't believe in that. I think that if you keep your virginity like that, it's like having a Christmas present. You just don't open it, you know. It's not where it's at.
Look, the hippies were interested in sex because everyone is, in all times and places throughout all of human history. I mean, the hippies didn't discover sex, right? You know, maybe it was different ways of doing it. It was ways of doing it more in public.
In public, in private, wherever, and with whomever. In the Haight-Ashbury, the marriage contract no longer had much to do with doing it or not.
The idea was, it's my personal fulfillment that counts. If it feels good, I'm going to do it. If that means breaking up my marriage or living with somebody and even having babies without getting married, that's fine. If I break up my marriage, the kids will be fine because if I'm happy, they'll be happy. It led to terrible consequences. It led to bad consequences for the children, of course. Nothing was permanent. You couldn't count on anybody. That gave them such an emotional wound.
While sex, drugs, and rock and roll were more than enough to keep the majority of Haight residents occupied, there was one group that had a more ambitious agenda. They called themselves the Diggers.
They took it upon themselves to feed everybody and would do barbecues down in the Panhandle, in Panhandle Park. And their barbecues consisted of meat they had boosted from the back of a Safeway truck.
Free food was just the opening volley in the Diggers' free revolution.
Free communes. There were apartments that people could live in. Because people were so transient, there was a pretty high turnover. There were about, at one time, more than 20 of these. Free pads. Free clothes at the free store.
We got medical students from UC Med Center to come down to the Digger Free Store on Wednesday nights, and they'd hold free clinics.
This was creating an alternative society, not just a revolutionary movement, an alternative society. It would be a free society, not materialistic, not just anti-materialistic, not materialistic.
By the fall of 1966, the Haight-Ashbury was a semi-autonomous, psychedelic city-state with its own lifestyle, its own culture, its own newspaper, even free public services. For some, it was more than that, a workable alternative to straight society, one that replaced conformity with creativity, repression with emotional and sexual freedom, war with peace and love.
There's a long history of Americans thinking they could found a new civilization, found a new order, and this is a lot healthier way to do it than killing a lot of Indians. But it also unearthed all kinds of themes in American life that had been somewhat suppressed, like the idea of boundless freedom, the idea of finding some sort of utopian quality in life.
LSD amplified a sense of what was possible. Didn't always deliver and make good on the possibility, but it certainly created an awesome sense of possibility. And nowhere was that more vivid than in the Haight-Ashbury community in the mid-60s. A sense that almost anything's possible. A sense of we can take control, we can do it our way, and we can do it in a better way.
There's nothing to fear. There's nothing to enforce or not enforce. We're living our life as beautifully as we can.
Most Californians didn't agree, but the hate was ready to take on the establishment and turn on the world.
Born to be wild. Born to be wild.
I don't know. I don't have words, man. That's all. I just have soul.
All the leaves are brown, and the sky is gray, I've been for a walk.
For a while, the hate world and the straight world coexisted in relative peace. But by the fall of 1966, the honeymoon was over. On October 6th, California became the first state to criminalize the possession and distribution of LSD.
Drugs had been a problem in California for about a decade or more. There had been a number of deaths and other serious health problems from people using LSD.
Just as early LSD researchers had feared, the unsupervised use of the drug was spawning demons. Bellevue Hospital in New York reported that 75 persons had been admitted over a 12-month span with acute psychosis induced by LSD. Many reported uncontrollable impulses toward violence. 2 attempted murder, and 1 jumped in front of a subway train after a voice in his head ordered him to.
There was a guy sitting over in the corner, and I came back about 4 hours later. He was still sitting in the corner. And I said, what's going on with him? And the group told me, and they just ignored him, that he thought he was an orange. And if you poked him, all the juices would run out of him. And what I'm saying, in effect, is there was a real enormous tolerance for psychosis.
Drugs are going to hurt you whether you take them for the right reason or the wrong reason. And there were all sorts of myths, which I think we thoroughly explored and came to believe are false, is that good people have good trips, bad people have bad trips. Well, we did a lot of research in this area. It turns out that drugs are bad for you. And we honestly didn't know that, and I don't think the culture as a whole knew this.
I think the most negative thing about the hippies was people making choices early in life that were going to have long-running consequences that they didn't fully appreciate. I mean, you were making mistakes that could be very serious mistakes, and you weren't going to discover that until you were down the road, and by then it's too late.
Despite the warnings, the hate was undaunted. On the day the LSD ban went into effect, a crowd of 3,000 gathered in the panhandle of Golden Gate Park, and in plain sight of police, placed tabs of acid on their tongues and simultaneously swallowed. The show of collective defiance galvanized the hate community as never before, but a greater threat loomed on the horizon. On November 8, 1966, conservative Ronald Reagan stunned the nation by trouncing California's Democratic incumbent governor. The governor-elect described the Bay Area as a hotbed of evil and quipped that its inhabitants dressed like Tarzan, had hair like Jane, and smelled like Cheetah.
I remember Ronald Reagan talking about going by protest marches or protest demonstrations in which the participants were carrying signs that said, "Make love, not war," and he remarked that most of them looked like they weren't capable of doing either one.
With their lifestyle under threat, and with a sense of destiny inflated by hallucinogens, hate community leaders decided to go on the offensive. They would bring together all of the factions and superstars of youth culture for one mediagenic mega event. Their objective? To turn the world onto the splendors and benefits of the new utopian society. They called it the human being. A press conference was held and a press release issued that declared, "Hang your fears at the door and join the future." 3,000 were expected. Over 30,000 came. Among those addressing the throng was poet Allen Ginsberg, revered as the poet laureate of the Beats, 1950s rebels whose anti-authoritarian philosophy presaged much of what was going on in the Haight. There was Jerry Rubin, an anti-war organizer from Berkeley, whose hardline political rhetoric was lost on the free-spirited crowd. And there was the Pope of Dope himself, Timothy Leary, exhorting the crowd to turn on, tune in, and drop out. Leary, whose dismissal from Harvard for his LSD excesses had made him a national figure, was now on tour promoting the League of Spiritual Development, a church with acid as its holy sacrament.
He reminded me of a cross between a godlike figure and a used car salesman, and I could never quite figure out where the actual man was.
As noteworthy as the speakers on the podium were those handling security down below, Hell's Angels. Volatile, racist, and notoriously right-wing, the Angels had even assaulted a Berkeley peace rally in 1965 in collusion with the Oakland police. But the Angels had two things in common with the hippies of the Haight. They hated authority, and they loved drugs.
They had a code that if one Hell's Angel was insulted, they would all join together and beat the shit out of whoever the person was who said the wrong thing. One of them came up to me at one point. I was interviewing someone, and he asked me for $1, and I didn't hesitate. I gave him $1.
They became a sort of adjunct to the hippie scene. Strangely, they took on the role of being the security force.
On the day of the be-in, there was little need for keeping the peace. People twirled and danced to the music of the Dead and the Airplane, grooved on the Loving Vibe, and tripped out on Owsley acid that the diggers had slipped into the free turkey sandwiches.
By the time the day was over, everybody was loaded. Everybody was hallucinating. But also, you know, everybody was in paradise.
The human being was heaven for the news media as well. Nearly every major American media outlet, including the big three TV networks, ran features on the baffling new lifestyle revolution on display at the be-in. Suddenly, the Haight was the focus of worldwide attention.
I mean, that's where a lot of energy came together and vibrated and then moved out to the country and around, like a big Certs commercial or something.
The media amplified the weirdness that they could get, which was superficial. And what they amplified became sort of part of a stock footage that they could run. There's something bizarre going on in the world. And indeed, there was something extremely bizarre going on in the world, but the fiber of it was generally missing, and the freakiness of the show was what went out into circulation.
That's what the cameras would pick up, but the conversations that hippies had usually was never filmed, and media never got it. So what was really the internal part of what hippies were thinking and doing, since they were so diverse, such different people, was often not captured.
Remember, throughout this whole hippie period, you're having magazine articles being done on the hippies. Time, Life, Newsweek, covers, big spreads. And who is putting those magazine articles together? Are hippies writing those articles? Are hippies the editors at the magazines picking the pictures? No, it's older people doing it, mostly men. So they're looking at all the pictures of the cute, naked hippie chicks, and they're the ones picking those pictures for the magazines. So there's also a lot of voyeurism going on, intergenerational voyeurism.
Public opinion split along generational lines.
Well, I think mainstream America, looking at, bearded people, looking at people who seem to have not just indifference, but almost a contempt for moral standards, for traditional American values. We're totally shocked first, then repelled by them. They were just too counter the culture.
You get kind of this parental fear that, boy, I don't want my kid going down that road.
But for their sons and daughters, those exact same images had the exact opposite effect. If you were living in Nebraska or in Iowa, what you saw was a picture of two kids living on their own without parents, smoking cigarettes, dressing how they wanted, doing what they wanted. You went, ding, that's for me. The human being had succeeded in its mission. The hate and its utopia-seeking inhabitants had captured the imagination of a massive, restless generation. The hippie revolution had begun.
You don't know what we can find. Won't you come with me, little girl, on a magic carpet ride? Well, you don't know.
By the spring of 1967, flower power was in full bloom. Baby boomers by the tens of thousands latched on to the symbols and styles on display at the Human Being to express their disapproval of their parents and of American society in general.
There was a sense among young people in the 1960s that they were dissatisfied with the world that their parents had made, and they were looking for ways of creating an alternative. The hippies defined what that alternative was.
Considering that they'd grown up the beneficiaries of the greatest economic expansion in modern history, it can be hard to see what exactly the boomers were so dissatisfied with. After the Allied victory in World War II, the U.S., with just 6% of the world's population, was producing nearly half of the world's goods.
I really felt that if I did well in school, I worked hard, it was going to be, pretty easy to make a living. I was optimistic about my country and my culture. I thought it was, it was based on merit and hard work. I guess I was proud of who I was. I was proud of my family. My father had been, writing and publishing since 1952 and not really making a living at it. Kurt became famous later, so there was certainly some struggle involved, but it was all very optimistic.
But beneath the bright, cheerful surface, problems were festering. Driving the expansion was a can-do military mindset that legions of American servicemen carried home with them from the battlefields of Europe and Asia. With a 5-star general in the White House and self-sacrifice and obedience on the duty roster, the land of the free became the home of bureaucracy, regimentation, and lockstep conformity.
It was like living in a straitjacket. You had one career track. You just had to do it the way it was supposed to be done. And there was a sense of rebelling against those rules.
The truth is, a huge number of the best and the brightest and the hardest working people in my generation felt compelled to try to find an alternative. It was looking for a way to live and still be able to feel good about yourself.
Frustration never disappears. Human beings will always find reasons to be frustrated, good and bad. But even the frustration itself is going to be huge if it's baby boomers doing it, because there are just so damn many of them.
As the movement spread, mini Haight-Ashburys sprang up from Florida to Seattle, while psychedelic scenes that had been gestating parallel to the Haight became magnets for counterculture wannabes. In New York's East Village, the scene was arty, intellectual, and deeper into hard drugs like heroin and mephedrine, aka speed. In LA, hippies flocked to the hot clubs lining the Sunset Strip, rubbing shoulders with Hollywood honchos and movie stars. Across the pond, the London scene was high on fashion as well as acid. It even had its own Timothy Leary figure in novelist Aldous Huxley. Huxley, author of the classic dystopian fantasy Brave New World, was so taken with the drug that he had it fed to him intravenously as he lay dying. But the ultimate hippie mecca was still the place where it all started, San Francisco. Tourists poured in, many with windows rolled up and doors locked, as though they were passing through a wild animal preserve.
We became freaks, you know, that people came with their cameras to take our picture, you know.
On April 5th, 1967, the Gray Line Bus Company conducted the first hippie hop tour of the Haight District, touting it as a safari through Psychedelphia and the only foreign tour within the continental limits of the United States.
Normally, you'd have people from all around the world. First thing they wanted to know, do we see the Haight-Ashbury? One time I had a group of young people moon the bus. You know, that was kind of a shocker for people thinking, you know, San Francisco has it all.
Weary of the crowds and constant scrutiny, Haight residents started pushing back.
They'd stop the buses, and they'd extort money to let them go through the streets there. So we did have to put a stop to that.
They did a lot of street clearing and, you know, trying to arrest as many people as possible. So it got very uncomfortable there.
The worst was yet to come. From all over the country, young people were converging on San Francisco.
Kids were showing up, just hundreds and hundreds a day.
Some of these people are coming from down and out situations, or from broken homes or difficult situations they were running away from. For whatever reasons they were running away, they were running away. They get to the Haight-Ashbury, penniless, no way to earn an income. There's no jobs when you have thousands and thousands of people coming from out of town. What are they going to do? They're living off the streets, they're hungry, they're down and out, they're taking these very powerful mind-altering drugs. It was a pretty rough street scene.
I saw a lot of young kids getting taken advantage of by older kids because it was, you know, a predatory environment. They went through some unsavory areas and frequently got picked clean by the native inhabitants before they got to Haight and Ashbury.
Young girls were especially vulnerable.
It was a sad thing to see these lives destroyed, not only with voluntary sexual intercourse, but there would be the predators like the pimps who would try and get these young girls to work for them.
Throughout the so-called Summer of Love, the flood of runaways continued unabated, swelling to over 100,000.
The sort of budding community of the Haight, I would say, crumpled under the onslaught of thousands of kids with no place to go.
The most critical need was for medical care.
The kids would come out here, you know, thinking it's summer in California, you know, San Francisco, bare feet, and it's cold. We were really warning the runaways, this is not a place to come to. It's evolved into a very, very hard drug scene. It's no longer fun and games.
Heroin became available, and a lot of amphetamine, drugs that really could damage people. When you start injecting drugs, you're spreading diseases.
I think one of the worst experiences I had was a young girl who had overdosed on heroin, and somebody had suggested that the antidote was to inject milk into her. And they did that. And we got her to the hospital, and she died some hours later. Probably would have died without that being injected into her.
As the drugs got more dangerous, so did the dealers.
You had mainly gangsters moving in to control the drug trade, and that was really what sowed the beginnings of the end of the Haight.
Just how far the hate had come from the peace and love days was evidenced by the murder of Super Spade, one of Owsley's dealers. He was shot in the back of the head, stuffed into a sleeping bag, and dumped over a cliff.
That's what the police see. The scene is everybody's happy, love is there, it's wonderful, it's nice, but we get to clean up the mess after it's over.
On October 6, 1967, exactly 1 year after California's anti-LSD law went into effect, a solemn procession made its way through the streets of the Haight-Ashbury, bearing a coffin filled with beads, peace signs, and flowers. The diggers called the event the Death of Hippie. The Haight's utopian pipe dream was over, done in by an overdose of drugs and media hype. But the movement it had given birth to was still very much alive and turning in a new direction, east. Since their American debut in February of 1964, the Beatles were the most popular musical group on the planet. But by 1967, that wasn't enough. Over those 3 years, the band's musical sophistication had grown exponentially. So had its interest in drugs. Even in the early days, there were amphetamines and barbiturates to get them through long, grueling nightclub gigs in Liverpool and Munich. Then came hallucinogens. Turned on to pot by fellow hippie icon Bob Dylan in 1964, they soon moved on to LSD, producing the greatest masterpiece of the psychedelic era, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
All of a sudden, the Beatles are doing the hippie thing. It was just like, you know, a free advertisement for all this stuff. When they let their hair down, so to speak, it was a huge boost to this whole scene.
The Fab Four were flying high, too high perhaps. John Lennon, by his own estimate, took over 1,000 acid trips, and once assembled his fellow band members for the sole purpose of informing them that he was Jesus Christ. George Harrison, like Lennon, had done his share of acid. But a visit to the Haight-Ashbury during the disastrous Summer of Love convinced him that LSD wasn't the way. I was expecting them all to be nice and clean and friendly and happy, Harrison would later say. Instead, they were a bunch of hideous, spotty little teenagers.
When he got there, it didn't really match the idealized vision that they may have had, because again, you had a lot of down-and-out young kids on the street. It degenerated by the time the Summer of Love rolled around. And I think when George Harrison saw that, it was an impetus in part for his interest in turning away from drugs per se.
The quiet Beatle now joined the growing ranks of hippies seeking a spiritual high without the life-destroying side effects of acid.
They sought to almost recreate the LSD experience or aspects of it through other natural means.
Harrison found what he was looking for in the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi.
He had a pretty straightforward Hindu approach, except that he moved in rather aristocratic right-wing circles in India, and he was generally frowned upon by many of the ashram leaders because he charged for his services, whereas traditionally in India, it's always free.
The Maharishi promised cosmic consciousness, a state of heightened awareness and creativity without drugs. Soon the Beatles, Donovan, and other long-haired hitmakers were practicing the Maharishi's special brand of yoga, known as Transcendental Meditation, or simply TM.
So for a little while, they were his great advocates, and as soon as they became interested, of course, then the Beach Boys and everybody else became interested.
7 months later, the Mop Tops and the Maharishi had a falling out. But the grinning guru was already a fixture on the hippie scene, paving the way for a flood of Asian mystics, swamis, and shamans.
A lot of people became interested in spiritual matters, usually Eastern rather than Western.
The embrace of the mystical had always been a part of the counterculture mix, a reaction to the formal, dispassionate religious practice of the parental generation.
I think there was a huge vacuum, and so into this vacuum we went searching.
There was a revolt against reason. Many people felt that reason led to destruction, led to war, led to blandness, led to cultural suffocation, led to the suppression of the body in the name of the mind. I'm not saying that these were all well worked out ideas, but they were impulses that many people acted on. And one way to act on them is to go elsewhere for inspiration. You could think of it as a gigantic crapshoot.
I think a lot of hippie spirituality was a crock. I mean, they were taking very serious stuff from foreign cultures, often Asian cultures, you know, Zen from Japan and China, things from India, and they were debasing it, misunderstanding it, just grabbing a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Now, on the other hand, that is a very old American habit. I mean, Thoreau and Emerson were picking up tidbits from India back in the 1840s. So Americans have been doing this for a long time.
Most of the mystical meanderings of the hippies were deemed harmless, even charming. Not so the movement's fascination with voodoo and witchcraft. Rock stars in particular, jaded by hero worship and an endless supply of drugs and sex, were drawn to the dark side. Doors lead singer Jim Morrison, who referred to himself variously as the Lizard King and Mr. Mojo Risen, was a big fan of legendary master of the black arts, Aleister Crowley, as were the Beatles, who featured him on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's. Crowley, born October 12, 1875, was called the wickedest man in the world for his devilish rituals, pansexuality, and alleged advocacy of child sacrifice. Another admirer of Crowley's was Anton LaVey, founder of the world's first Church of Satan. LaVey, a former lion tamer and police photographer, had such a following among hippie occultists and Hollywood celebs that he was cast as the devil in Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby. Once, while conducting a seminar on cannibalism at his spooky San Francisco mansion, LaVey served up real human flesh, the thigh of a young woman, donated by a local physician.
By setting at naught all of the conventions of the larger society, feel that they are becoming God. And, you know, so this was a kind of language you could talk in more religious ages. But they very often ended up doing acts of violence because, in a way, the more you transgress the conventions, the more the proof is that you are special.
But the most demonic character of all was living just a few blocks away in the post-Summer of Love, Haight-Ashbury.
And I remember one experience at the Haight-Ashbury Clinic, which was kind of fascinating to me when I talk about the hellish side. A guy came in with 3 hippie-type women in shifts with nothing underneath, which was the dress code of the period. And he was a little guy, and he started to insult the doctor who had a peace symbol around his neck. And he, I remember he got very ferocious, and he said, "You motherfuckers, you know, you don't know what you're doing." When I later saw a picture of him on the front page of the LA Times, it was Charlie Manson.
Manson was a career criminal who had done hard time, once raping a fellow inmate at Razor's Edge. Upon release, he moved to the Haight, reinventing himself as a hippie singer-songwriter. He made high-powered friends in the music biz, like Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson and Neil Young of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young fame, who later recalled, "He was great. He was unreal, really, really good." But Manson's true talents had nothing to do with music.
He gathers around him a kind of a harem of young women, very impressionable. Again, these street kids who are blowing their minds, and he becomes the dictator, if you will. He was a totalitarian personality, and he really kind of preyed upon people who were very open, very vulnerable as a result of their drug experiences. When a person is under the influence of LSD, they become very sensitive, very susceptible and vulnerable to manipulative personalities.
He bound the wills of his impressionable young acolytes to his through a combination of LSD, pseudo-guru babble derived from his study of Scientology, and awesome sexual stamina. According to Charlie's Girls, Manson would make love to one or the other of them at least 7 times a day, before and after each meal, and once more in the middle of the night.
What it taught me is that when you have a cult leader that is disturbed for whatever reason, and he has control over the minds of young people, that they can lead them to very bad things.
On October 7th, 1967, in a litter-strewn tenement near New York's Tompkins Square Park, the blood-spattered bodies of 2 young hippies were discovered. Linda Fitzpatrick was the runaway daughter of a wealthy Connecticut spice merchant. James Groovy Hitchinson was a mellow marijuana dealer who more often than not gave his wares away for free. Linda and Groovy had been attending an East Village drug party when the murderers, both African-American, lured them to the basement using LSD as bait. Their skulls had been bashed in with a brick wrapped in a man's coat. The Groovy murders, as they were labeled in the tabloids, were the tragic outgrowth of the escalating turf war between the hippies and their minority neighbors. Hippie enclaves often bordered on inner-city ghettos where housing was cheap, but all too often to the struggling residents of those neighborhoods, the influx of long-haired, middle-class kids meant higher rents, panhandlers, and drug dealers.
I won't say a lot, but a portion of the people who lived in that community did not like hippies. Some hippies were very dirty. Some were mentally ill, some were drunks, some were heavy drug users, you know, bad drugs.
Here was the real catastrophe. If you look at all of the statistics on black Americans, everything was getting better, 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 better. And blacks were succeeding, and then bam, comes this cultural revolution. You cannot, if you were at the bottom of society, let it all hang out, tune in, turn on, and drop out. That was an absolute recipe for failure, and it was disastrous for black America.
As tensions rose, male flower children complained that they were being beaten or robbed, hippie girls verbally abused and molested. To protect themselves, some hippies began doing the most ungroovy thing imaginable, carrying guns. Others fled to find utopia elsewhere. By 1968, tens of thousands of hippies had relocated to rural areas to be closer to nature and as far as possible from the danger and corruption of the concrete jungle and American society in general.
It was that fantasy that lay behind the hippies and their communes. The idea was it's a sort of conventionalized, uptight society that makes for crime, makes for war. This idea that we are closer to nature, we are the way natural men would be if not tainted and corrupted by society.
We really felt like we were on the threshold of a new beginning.
While each commune was different in style and focus, many sought to balance spiritual with material needs, rejecting the industrial for the agrarian, the plastic for the natural, the synthetic for the organic.
We actually did try to live the way early Christians lived, and lived according to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, judge not lest you be judged, etc., etc. And that was all part of it. Everybody worked hard, whether they were making firewood or building the house or whatever. It felt so good to be able to work all day.
I loved living communally. I enjoyed it because I enjoyed sharing and working cooperatively with people. And that's what that commune meant to me, that I never really had problems. And I always wanted to continue living that way.
Everybody's money went into the pot, so that we shared the money, whatever money was coming in. The welfare checks went into the pot, everything went into the pot.
Money wasn't the only thing that was held in common. At some communes, newcomers were notified that sexual partners were also to be shared freely, on demand.
All 60 people slept in the same room, and then the children slept in another room. So there was a lot of exchanges of partners that went on during that time.
There have been a lot of experiments like this in the course of human history. There was famously Brook Farm just outside Boston in the 1840s. The fact is, people are possessive. People get sexually jealous. And out of these communes in the past have come a tremendous amount of disharmony.
While living outside societal norms could be tough on young adults, it was children who were most at risk.
In one commune where I was interviewing the parents, and their 5-year-old child was really having what I considered to be a kind of a psychotic episode, sort of screaming and yelling, and one would wonder why they would impose that acid on their child. In my interview, I clearly recall their rationalization was, acid is beautiful, it's good for everyone.
One of the most common mistakes, and the one that caused most communes to founder, was underestimating just how complicated the simple life could be.
It was a grand adventure, but I don't think we knew what it would be like day after day to just spend facing ourselves and how annoying we could become to each other.
We looked around one day and there were 3 of us left. People left for different reasons. People went off in their own relationships. Then it just kind of dissipated, and I stayed here because I actually like living in this town.
While the hippies who fled back to the land struggled to create a separate peace, there were those who hadn't yet given up on America. In 1968, it was a land tipping perilously towards chaos. The first 6 months of 1968 were among the most devastating in American history. January 30th, the Tet Offensive leaves over 2,000 American soldiers dead, belying the assertions of the military that an end to the war is in sight. March 31st, with support for the war effort rapidly eroding, President Lyndon Johnson announces that he will not seek re-election. April 4th, Martin Luther King Jr. is gunned down in Memphis, sparking the worst domestic strife since the Civil War. June 4th, peace candidate Robert Kennedy is assassinated.
The same things that confused us, the war in Vietnam, the death of Kennedy's, Martin Luther King, the violence, all of that stuff also devastated our parents. And they really didn't know what to tell us. We were all sort of in it together, trying to figure out what happens next. We certainly did not feel safe. I would not have felt safe taking pre-med courses and getting ready to go to med school. I would have felt like I was not responding to reality as it was.
The political scene in America in 1968 was crazy and poisonous. You had racial problems that were following what seemed to be racial promise. You had a war, and you had opposition to that war. You had a convergence of two very difficult things, and they amplified each other.
Protests for and against the war turned increasingly violent and divisive.
Hate the war, hate the politicians who got us into the war, but don't hate the soldier who's fighting it, because he's fighting it because he believes in the principle of your country.
Hippies, with their mantras of peace and love, were almost invariably pro-civil rights and anti-war. But their inner-directed, free-your-mind-first approach to changing the world put them at odds with anti-war groups like the Students for a Democratic Society, who advocated direct confrontation with the powers that be.
The hippies were also, in many ways, in revolt against politics, including radical politics. And the divisions and tensions between the, roughly speaking, hippies and, roughly speaking, politicos in the mid-60s, those divisions were very intense. But don't get the ideas these are like two separate teams. You know, they're sort of the blues and the reds, or, you know, nobody was wearing uniforms that said hippie or politico, and there was a fair amount of traffic across the boundary.
So intense that some on the left even theorized that the hippies were the end result of a plot by the CIA to neutralize the anti-war movement with LSD, turning potential protesters into self-absorbed navel-gazers. Whatever their true origins, some in the hippie movement were determined to let their voice be heard, as unconventional as that voice might be.
One of the most interesting things about the hippie approach to political activity was that they brought a level of humor and levity to it that you wouldn't find in a normal old left demonstration of some sort.
A prime example of this Groucho Marxism was the anti-war anthem penned by ex-Navy man turned acid rocker, Country Joe McDonald.
What are we fighting for? In 20, 30 minutes I wrote I Feel Like I'm 16 to Diarrhea with the chorus and the words. I think I could write it because I was in the Navy. I'd had a military experience, and I wasn't mystified by the military or war at all. We're all gonna die. Come on Wall Street and don't be slow.
More troublesome for the military was another sample of hippie activism, the exorcism of the Pentagon.
There was an anti-war march in October 1967 at the Pentagon, where young people, about 50,000, and older people too, surround the Pentagon, and some proceeded to try to exorcise the Pentagon, levitate. Of course, they didn't really do that, but that was sort of the whimsical, LSD-influenced feeling of protest. That's the way protests began to be expressed. It was very unique and unprecedented.
Though unsuccessful in lifting the enormous concrete structure, they did manage to raise the peace movement's media profile.
And this, of course, is when you have the famous images of the National Guard standing up with their bayonets fixed and anti-war demonstrators pushing flowers down the barrels of the gun, which is a very, very powerful image. That picture really expresses the whole innocence of that period, the idea that love and peace can conquer the war machine. It's very sad that it's not the case.
Among those participating in the action at the Pentagon were Abby Hoffman, a New York-based community organizer and Jerry Rubin, former Berkeley activist and featured speaker at the Human Be-In. Both were seeking ways to get hippies more actively involved in the peace movement. They joined forces and, together with political humorist Paul Krasner, formed the Youth International Party, Yippies for short.
Through their kind of expressive theatrical side, used the media to show kids who are in the counterculture who might not be very political how insane society was.
It looked like fun. You know, becoming a yippie was replaced running away with the circus. And it was the same with the merry pranksters. It looked like fun, and it was fun. And what people learned from this was that responsibility can be fun.
As the summer of 1968 approached, the Yippies set their sights on what promised to be the political dust-up of the decade, the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago. With Johnson out of the race and Kennedy dead, radicals of every stripe saw the future of the party as up for grabs and the convention as a battleground for the very soul of America. For political pranksters Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman, it was showtime.
Mayor Daley viewed the Yippies particularly disfavorably. Young people who had never worked an honest day in their lives. They organized the Festival of Life here in Lincoln Park that he viewed essentially as an orgy.
Though the city denied them a license for the event, the Yippies refused to back off.
I was getting bad vibes. I thought it was going to be a massacre. They were going to just kick our friggin' at the Democratic Convention.
Though only 10,000 festival goers actually showed up, the stage was set for disaster. Running battles between police and protesters erupted throughout the convention, culminating in a riot in front of the hotel where the Democratic nominee, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, was staying. By convention's end, over 1,000 protesters were injured, and one was dead.
The song, "If you're coming to San Francisco, put flowers in your hair," became, "If you're coming to Chicago, wear a helmet."
Rubin later admitted that they intentionally provoked the melee to expose the Gestapo tactics of the police and to gain sympathy for the Yippie cause. But the plan had backfired. As televisions across the nation beamed reports from the convention, what registered most were images of long-haired hippie malcontents creating havoc in the heartland.
For many people who even had some sympathy for the spirit of the challenge to authority, and for the hippies in particular, it really dies that week in Chicago.
After almost a decade of riots and resistance, of sit-ins and be-ins, of hippies and yippies, what the majority of Americans wanted above all else was law and order. The man they elected to give it to them was Republican Richard M. Nixon, who was locked and loaded for all-out war on the counterculture.
Richard Billhouse Nixon do solemnly swear.
On January 20th, 1969, Richard M. Nixon was sworn in as the 37th President of the United States. One of his first orders of business was to authorize the escalation of Operation COINTELPRO, the FBI's secret war on dissent in America. Included on the long list of domestic targets were, quote, advocates of new lifestyles and apostles of nonviolence and racial harmony. No-knock laws were pushed through Congress, and agents infiltrated counterculture groups to gather information and to stir up trouble. To prep for their undercover assignments, trainees would drop acid and forego bathing for days on end. But despite the backlash from the so-called silent majority, the tide of hippie influence was rising. National surveys showed that more and more establishment types were turning on to counterculture drugs. especially marijuana. By '69, sales of grass topped 100 million a year. Bankers, doctors, even cops let their hair grow over their collars, and there was a brisk trade in wigs, fake beards, and mustaches for those who wanted to be clean-shaven at work and shaggy on the weekend.
Everybody could wear long hair. It was no longer, allied with a single statement.
To complete their countercultural couture, men donned ruffled shirts, necklaces, fur coats, and shoulder bags. In women's fashion, there were psychedelic colors and patterns and the uninhibited, braless look. Showbiz was also quick to turn on and tune in. On Broadway, there was Hair, the tribal love rock musical, producer Michael Butler's attempt to bring the message of the hippies to mainstream America.
I'm Peter Fonda. We've just finished making a movie dealing with the most talked about subject of the day.
At the movies, there were no-budget exploitation flicks like The Trip, with weird LSD-inspired special effects and plenty of underclad hippie chicks.
The wildest of pleasures possess you.
Starring Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper, and written by a pre-Walk of Fame Jack Nicholson, The Trip was blasted by critics, but it made enough at the box office to give the trio the green light for their next project. Easy Rider, directed by Dennis Hopper, took in over $50 million, won Best Film by a new director at Cannes, and sent Hollywood studios scrambling for scripts with counterculture content. But of all the industries that mined hippie cachet for profit, it was music that hit the mother lode. Growing directly out of youth culture and synced up to its desires and aspirations, rock music, acid rock in particular, fueled an expansion of the music business unlike anything seen before or since. In 1968, music sales topped $100 million for the first time in history. Attendance at live events also exploded. Starting with the Monterey Pop Festival in the summer of 1967, outdoor rock concerts were drawing ever larger crowds of both hardcore hippies and so-called plastic hippies who liked being part of the happening scene. After promoting a series of successful concert events in the Miami area, head shop entrepreneur Michael Lang laid plans for a concert in upstate New York. From the get-go, the Woodstock Music and Arts Festival ran into trouble from the area's more right-wing residents.
They became very unfriendly. People started shooting at us. It was uncomfortable to be there, and they pulled our permit.
At the 11th hour, Lang found his dream site in the tiny town of Bethel, New York. But more trouble was brewing from the other side of the cultural divide.
A boyfriend of mine and I went up about a week before Woodstock started. The workers during the day would put up the fences, and every night people would unscrew all the work that they had done, because they wanted to keep it open, because they knew that thousands of people were going to show up.
A lot of people said they came up the thruway, and it took over 12 hours to get there from New York City. And it was the first time ever, and never since, that the New York State Thruway was closed. Nobody was ready for it, and shortly after they announced that this was going to be a free concert because, well, people had tickets, a lot of people had tickets, but there were no fences or anything, and it just filled up quickly. Before you knew it, there was a city there. It was quite shocking. Within hours, all of the stores reported that they were sold out of everything.
Soon, food, drinking water, and other necessities were in dangerously short supply. An estimated 500,000 hot dogs were consumed on the first day alone. Medical personnel were also woefully scarce. Approximately one doctor for every 22,000 attendees. Glenn Jospy, an intern at the time, was recruited on the spot.
I went up there at the party and had my cowboy hat on, and I was sitting there enjoying the music. And the head physician, he was shouting, so does anybody have any IV Valium? Someone was having a seizure. I said, I have IV Valium. And he said, who are you? And 15 minutes later, I was in a helicopter. It flew me back to my bungalow, and my parents were sitting on the lawn. We didn't know what was happening. They saw I got out of the helicopter. I walked past them, went into the bungalow. I grabbed my doctor's bag, and I said, I'll see you in 3 days.
No one had really thought, besides the first aid station, about what's going to happen if we got totally landlocked, which is what happened, and people began getting sick. Someone got up and made an announcement saying, anybody who took the blue acid, it was bad acid, so you might get sick. Well, half the crowd who had taken acid probably did not remember what color the acid was that they had taken, and people began panicking, thinking that they had taken something really bad.
Bad planning, bad acid, bad weather. In one 3-hour stretch, festival goers were hammered by 5 inches of rain. Lang and his associates feared that the hungry, rain-soaked crowd would turn ugly. What saved the day, and possibly their physical well-being, was the music. Lang had signed some of the biggest acts: the Jefferson Airplane, The Who, Janis Joplin, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, promising twice the going rate to make sure they actually showed up.
Once the music began, I felt we were okay for the weekend.
One sour note was struck when Yippie Abby Hoffman blitzed on acid, mounted the stage during The Who's set.
I don't think Townsend had any idea what he was doing there, or maybe even who he was, or who knows what would happen, and he hit him on the head, I believe, with his guitar, and smashed the guitar.
The crowd cheered. They wanted no part of the confrontation politics that were tearing the world beyond Woodstock apart. Neither did the local authorities.
Even the police, the state troopers, didn't hassle us. They were smoking grass with us, they were playing around and friendly and all of that.
To see that many people together in total harmony, and I haven't seen anything like that before or after.
It was sort of like that play Hair, you know, when Jupiter aligns with Mars. Everything came together at one time, quite by accident, if you believe that an accident like that could happen. And this was the accumulation before we headed into the 70s, before we hit disco, you know? This was our last message to the earth, was that peace.
Even with a share of the profits from movie and album sales, it would be 20 years before the Woodstock Music and Art Festival turned a profit. But while it might have started out as just one more attempt to squeeze profit from what the hippies had wrought, in the end, money wasn't what Woodstock was all about.
We had a chance to pick ourselves up by our collective bootstraps and be amazing together. And we did just that. It was a chance for us to show the whole world how it could be if we ran the show.
Out of nowhere, in one of America's most divided hours, the hippie dream of a loving, harmonious world seemed close at hand. But at the very same moment, 3,000 miles to the west, events were unfolding that would put that dream permanently beyond reach. In August 1969, while Woodstock attendees were teaching New York State the power of love, California was getting a lesson in unmitigated evil. In a palatial Beverly Hills mansion, the lacerated bodies of Sharon Tate, actress wife of director Roman Polanski, and 4 others were found. Tate, who was 8 months pregnant, had been stabbed 16 times. By October, police had the man they believed was behind the Tate slayings and a host of other hideous crimes. Songwriter, commune leader, and former Haight resident, Charles Manson. The conservative press had a field day.
This is what happens if you have free love and take drugs, and you finish up crawling into middle-class people's houses and killing them, on the orders of some drug-crazed hippie.
From a kind of conservative media perspective, it's sort of, I told you so, this is what the 60s are about.
The hippie community, which had grown increasingly paranoid in the wake of the government's covert war on the counterculture, suspected a frame-up. But as the evidence mounted, even die-hard conspiracy theorists had to accept the truth that a long-haired hippie minstrel could also be a hate-mongering psycho killer. On the heels of the Manson murders came another countercultural catastrophe, the Rolling Stones' free concert at California's Altamont racetrack. Billed as a West Coast Woodstock, the event degenerated into a hellish hate fest where a black man was stabbed to death by the very people hired to provide security, Hell's Angels.
The reason we have society is that, as Jefferson put it, it's a great reflection on human nature, that if men really could live together in harmony without government, without the social order, they would have been doing it for all these millennia that there have been men. It was finally a very fundamental error that the hippies and those around them made in the 60s, that if we would all just live naturally, everything would be fine.
Along with its holier-than-thou self-image, the movement was losing its heroes. On April 17, 1970, Paul McCartney announced that the Beatles, the band that helped bring hippie values to the world, was calling it quits. Other hippie icons made a less calculated exit. In the fall of 1970, drugs took the life of hippie megastars Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. Jim Morrison would soon follow.
We lost so many great people, and to think of what they could have been doing today, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Brian Jones, it goes on and on. That's a disappointment.
A great era in popular music was drawing to a close. So too was an unpopular war. In July of 1969, American troops started returning home from Vietnam. Disillusioned, bereft of heroes, and without the war to fuel its angst, it was time for many who participated in the movement to get back to where they once belonged.
So much happened to people who lived through those years. An unforgettable time for people. They wouldn't trade it for anything, but a lot happened and people got burnt out by the end of it.
I don't know if the hippies sowed their own destruction so much as that they tried to do something impossible. If you think you're going to come up with a totally new way to live and then everything's going to be fine, you're going to be disappointed.
After 5 tumultuous years, the hippies, the largest countercultural phenomenon in American history, faded away. Not quite. April 22nd, 1970, 20 million people gathered in cities across the country to celebrate Earth Day. The environment was officially on the national agenda, where it has remained ever since. Originally conceived in the hippie homeland of San Francisco, the roots of Earth Day can be traced to the Back to the Land movement of the late 60s and its headline-grabbing predictions of a coming eco-apocalypse. The $30 billion a year natural foods industry, the ever-expanding universe of personal style choices, the alternative medical and spiritual practices, and the women's and gay liberation movements also owe a substantial debt to to the hippies' radical rethinking of American priorities.
People had choices available to them as individuals and groups of people that were not there before. The cultural space was opened irrevocably. It would never be closed up again.
It did help women have a voice in things. Not in a feminist way, not in an isolationist way, but as human beings participating and equal.
But by lifting the lid of repression and conformity, the hippies also unleashed a Pandora's box full of bad behaviors. As the sexual revolution gained momentum, divorce rates soared. By 1976, the number of marriages that ended in divorce hit 50%, double that of 1958. Drugs lost their radical connotations and penetrated deeper into the American mainstream. By 1979, 70% of people 18 to 25 admitted to having used illegal drugs. As the 70s drew to a close, for better or for worse, the influence of the hippies was pervasive.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear that
Even the election of an old hippie nemesis to the White House in 1980 could not uproot all of the changes the flower children had sown in American culture. But ironically, the arena in which the hippies would have the greatest impact on the future of the planet wasn't cultural. It was technological. In April 1977, Steve Jobs and his partner Steve Wozniak introduced the Apple II, the first commercially viable personal computer.
We were so influenced by the People's Computer Company in Menlo Park, the same area that the hippie thought had come from. The whole hippie thinking was that basically the big, wealthy power structure should be undone. We want to turn the balance over, and we want to make the small individuals more important. And it was basically bringing this power, this mastery of their own universe away from the powers that be, the huge, big, rich corporations. All the big companies said this is really going to go nowhere. Steve Jobs was much more a hippie than I was, too. I mean, he really dressed in the sandals and ate seeds, and he would fly over to India to bathe in the Ganges River and try to get closer to this social phenomena of the world, but he was also dedicated at the same time to have a very big, successful life and a successful company someday.
Somehow we're putting a ding into the universe. I see these things in schools and kids growing up learning how to use them, and I see more and more of these personal computers being applied to everyday life situations.
The personal computer revolutionized the way the world works and plays. Next came an even more mind-blowing technology, the Internet, brought to you in part by another high-tech hippie, Stuart Brand. An early protege of Ken Kesey's, Brand was the driving force behind the Whole Earth Catalog, the Bible of the commune movement of the late 60s and early 70s. In the 80s and 90s, he was instrumental in forging the paradigm that led to the World Wide Web.
What the internet does is it empowers individuals. It takes away the power of mediating institutions and puts it all in the hands of people. And that, in many ways, is a logical outgrowth of the philosophy and the ideals of the hippie movement.
At the heart of the American experiment is a quest for utopia. A place where individuals live together in harmony while enjoying the freedom to fulfill their personal destiny. The hippies sought that utopia through music, through drugs, through communion with nature, through love. Failure was perhaps inevitable. But their brash rejection of the status quo reset the priorities of a generation, opened the door to a whole universe of innovative products and businesses, and reminded a nation obsessed with regimentation and conformity that the pursuit of happiness was, and always will be, a vital part of the American dream.
When I think of American society today, when you look at our attitudes towards so many things, sort of the liberalization of our values, our social values, whether you embrace them or not, I think you have to accept that we all have a little bit of hippie in us. And in that way, I think ultimately the hippies triumphed.